everybody. Welcome back to the Prosperity Playbook podcast. We are so happy to be back with you. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today, we are going to be talking about whether you should split or combine your finances. Seems to be a pretty hot topic these days, and we wanted to touch on it. But before we dive right in, we are four friends who started having a lot of conversations just about little life things and realized that there are a lot of lessons that we had to learn the hard way. And we are hoping to share some of those lessons with you. So hopefully you can skip a couple of those extra steps that we had to take. As you might notice, Jill is not with us today. She is on a little bit of a new adventure. She will still be around for plenty of episodes. She just won't be here for all of them. So don't panic. She'll still be here in the future. But today you have Courtney, Renee, and Britt here to talk about this podcast.
Awesome. All right. Well, the reason we picked this topic is twice this week I saw people on social media talking about this particular subject. One adamantly said you should absolutely never combine finances. And then the other one said, I think you should always combine finances. And first, of course, I feel like it's just straight up clickbait if you say always or never anything, because I think there's no one size fits all for anything, especially when we start talking about money and relationships. So I thought it was a very interesting thing. I kind of got lost in the comments for a while, was super curious of what other people had to say. So I thought this would be a great topic to bring to our little family here.
I love it. Absolutely.
What kind of responses were you seeing that you were surprised?
Well, I think it was just a total mixed bag. The gal that was talking about how you should never fully combine, her rationale behind that, I think, was simply, I think there's a lot of women, not necessarily just women, but I think in particular, you've got stay-at-home moms, things like that, that if something doesn't work out in the marriage, they feel stuck because they don't know how the finances work. They don't have any skills in that money department. And this particular person was saying, I really think it's important for everybody to have that, which I don't disagree with at all. I think it is really important. And whether you're a stay-at-home mom or not, I think that's super important. In fact, I was just thinking about that in my personal marriage. We're both pretty high earners and we have everything combined. But if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, like my husband's kind of screwed because
Mine too.
I don't think he knows like even most of the online banking passwords, and we've actively had this conversation multiple times. Like he knows everything's set up on automatic payment, but actually, if I get hit by a bus, like he is going to have to struggle a little bit. So I think that in and of itself, just, being really open and having some lists somewhere. I think we talked about that a little bit with the estate planning episode anyway, of having a list of what you have, what's your life insurance, what are your bank accounts, what are your investments, and then passwords for that kind of stuff, so that the power bill can keep getting paid and things like that.
I had to ask Britt yesterday, is there a way to find out what kind of insurance or who somebody has insurance with on their property? Because this person did not know. They had a water claim they needed to file. Finally figured it out because Britt said, check your email. You probably got emails. So that worked.
Can I ask how you decided to combine your finances?
Yes, you sure can. So when we started out, we kept things very separate. We would he had his own stuff, I had my own stuff. We both worked, and then we got a joint account where we figured out how much our total bills were each month. We divided by 2, and then each of us deposited that, and whatever was left, we could do whatever we wanted. And the reason we started it that way is I was a really good saver when we first met, and my husband was not so much. And so it was hard for us to agree on those type of things. So we started doing it that way for quite a while. And then as our lifestyle grew and things just got more expensive, it kind of grew into this. It was a little nebulous. My husband's self-employed. I'm 100% commission. And so some months I make really good money. But in the beginning of my career, I had months where I made nothing. Mm-hmm. And so it got really convoluted. And we were actually in a position where my husband hadn't given himself a raise for a really long time, and he was still paying himself just this very small thing. And my big paychecks were what were covering us. But then all of a sudden there would be a month where it was that I didn't make anything. And so then we had credit card balances, and that gets out of hand super fast. And I'm thinking, I'm going to close $3 million next month. I'll be fine, blah, blah, blah. And it just started snowballing, and it became an issue between us. And it was actually a marriage counselor that was like, Josh needs to take over the bills for a while. Like, he needs to see how much it costs to run your household. And so he took everything over instead of me doing it. And it just gave him a really good glimpse into what really costs to run our household. We should probably do it again now, by the way, because we somehow have just gotten more and more expensive. But it was a really good thing to make it so that we were both involved instead of me feeling like it was on me, just on me.
I think it helps too to not have much waste. I hate having waste of things, or we have a couple cars sitting in our driveway right now that need to get sold. And I think if somebody had to pay the bills, then they would sell those cars for the extra income to be able to pay the bills. And it definitely is good to be able to each have that opportunity to get to pay the bills so that you know where things come from and how much money is going out the door.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm hearing from both of you is how important communication is, which obviously I feel every episode we're like communication, but especially around money, I know that it can be an extremely hard thing to talk about. I know when Forrest and I came together, that was something that I just kind of avoided talking about because that's how my family handles conversations about money. So something that was really important to me when we got together was to not combine our finances because I had a bunch of debt. I had a car that I had bought, I had student loans, I had credit card debt, and I felt like it wasn't his responsibility to clean up my past mistakes. Now, if we get debt together, we own a home together now, so obviously we have that combined debt. So we do have a couple of combined accounts. So I kind of say we have separate but combined finances where we put money into account for all of our shared expenses, but all of our individual income goes into our own personal accounts for us to do with what we see fit. And I do think that there's future conversations to be had about, what are our investing goals and do we want to be able to buy a second house down the line? And if so, we do need to make some more combined financial decisions together. But I do still think that we will keep our accounts separate for the most part because there's a lot of autonomy in that. And I witnessed my parents having so many silly fights about money because they didn't see eye to eye on what they should be spending their money on. And I think a lot of those conversations would have just been moot point had they had separate accounts because then instead of spending our money, it's, well, if I want to spend my money on this, I should be able to do that.
Yeah, and that does come up. Sometimes my husband will be like, why are there 7 Amazon boxes on the front porch? And I'm like, you just bought an excavator. He's like, okay, never mind. It's
funny.
it's kind of this thing, like we give each other a little bit of a hard time, but his business stuff is separate and I don't have a lot of involvement in that at all anymore. I used to do all the books for it and I just don't have time for it anymore. So if something happens to him, also a problem because I don't know how to step in and start taking care of all those employees and stuff. So we need to do better, but you're right. It's absolutely about communication. I think, budgeting for fun things, like vacations and stuff like that is a great thing to do when you have combined finances. But I think it gets really complicated if you're not similar earners. Like if one person way out earns the other, or if you're a stay-at-home mom or something like that, sometimes it's absolutely necessary just because it takes more than just half that person's income to run the household. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution for it.
Yeah, I liked
agreed.
how Britt said that she does it, and that's how we do it as well. So you have to be okay with one person earning more than the other, and the person that's earning more taking more of that share. But I didn't really think about it with a stay-at-home mom and how that would work because you don't have that income coming in. So you have to be combined finances unless that stay-at-home mom has money coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex topic in that regard because I do feel like, there's certainly what they do has a ton of worth for sure. But it's one of the reasons I've always wanted to work. I love working, but it would be hard for me. I've never been good at spending other people's money. I guess I'll say it that way. I never wanted to let my parents buy me anything. I'm not confident or not comfortable in letting other people do that. I've always wanted to just make my own way. So it would be very hard for me to do that. But that's not how everybody is. And I actually saw another post on, I think, Threads the other day, and it was talking about how stay-at-home moms should get a salary. And I thought, I could see both sides of that. My first instinct was like, no, because then like, do you have to negotiate a raise, or
Right.
is that all the money that you get to spend if you need something else? Or
What if there's no extra money coming in? You know, you earn just enough to pay your bills. How do you get a salary?
I don't know. I thought it was a super interesting thing, and some of like some of the comments were crazy. Some of the men were like, absolutely not, because I don't want to have to fight with her if I don't think it was up to the standards of the salary. Like, how do you put a worth on what somebody does for you? How do you put a dollar figure on what your wife does for you? Like, where do you even start? How do you pick a number?
And I actually have a friend where the husband stays home and the wife's a doctor. Mm-hmm. So they've
totally.
swapped.
Yeah, it absolutely could be that way. I think that's getting more and more common. I think it's just hard to know how do you set an actual dollar figure. To me, that would be the hardest part. Is like, what's the starting
It's
point?
kind of funny too, because when we do life insurance assessments for people, if you're a stay-at-home mom, we typically calculate it at like $750,000 a year, because you're a house cleaner. You are typically doing all of the daycare, babysitting, you know, depending on how old the kids are, you're taking that expense off the table. You're doing all of the grocery shopping. And
With
so,
those little monsters.
right. It's like, so if that person's gone, you're having to hire a personal assistant, and you're having to hire a new daycare provider or a nanny. And you're having, you know, there's so many other things that go into it. But
Yeah.
when it comes to, how much would you pay that person? I have no idea how you pick that number.
$750,000 sounds good.
Right. Exactly.
Right, but that's probably not everyone's reality.
No.
So, but I think the answer lies in straight up communication and having some real lists. I think the reason that this does oftentimes become a really hot topic is because you see a lot of women that feel trapped, and it could be men too, not just to say women. That's usually what I see is the stay-at-home moms that maybe their marriage isn't great. Maybe their husband's a dick. Like, they feel stuck because they don't have any personal assets to walk away from the marriage with if something happens. And I think that is the biggest reason a salary was brought up, so that they would have something that they could start squirreling away some savings or a retirement account for themselves. And honestly, if you're a married couple and you're not contributing to retirement accounts for both of you, that's kind of a miss. I think you really should be doing that, because you're both going to need those things. But I do think that that's really important for people to understand finances. I see a ton of people that come out of a divorce, men and women both, that are like, my partner handled the mortgage last time. I don't know how to do this. And you know, treat me like a first-time home buyer, which is totally fine. But you know, they don't know how to make a mortgage payment by themselves, even if they're comfortable with it, or even if they qualify for it. They're like, whoa, that's a big number. And it's a very intimidating thing. And unfortunately, I do feel like a lot of people get trapped in a marriage that they're not very happy with because of finances.
It's about 50%, really.
Something that I have seen recently a few times is that situation where one of the partners doesn't have their name on any of the loans, on any of the cards, on anything. And so once they get out of the marriage, their credit doesn't exist, or is really low, because they didn't actually co-sign on anything. So I do think that even if you're not an earner, still making sure that your name is being tied to these things that you are a part of is important.
I think that's really well said. I do think that having some joint credit is important. And then once you have joint credit, get your own. Like, everybody should have their own individual credit card in case of a divorce situation or something like that. I think that will solve a lot of issues. But I have also seen that with, you know, I can think of somebody I know right now who, they never got married. They have a kid together. They've lived together for almost 20 years. But her name's not on anything. She's not on the title to the house. She's not on the mortgage. She's made half that mortgage payment the whole time. But if she were to leave him, she has nothing. She has,
Even if it's a common law marriage.
I mean, you'd have to fight for it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to say what she would or wouldn't get out of it. So
And how do you get a credit card if you're a stay-at-home mom and you don't have a job to put on your application? Do you put your husband down, and do you put your combined income,
Sure.
even though it's just your card?
You sure could. Yeah, I mean, the different credit card companies have different standards around that. I've honestly never tried to not put income on a credit card application, but a lot of times when you get those pre-approved credit applications in the mail, they already know that they're going to qualify you. So if you're getting those, just get one in your name. It doesn't have to be something with a massive limit. You could get a $500 limit on something and still build your own credit and have something that's just for you.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you're getting money from your husband to pay it.
Well, that's where that salary
I'm not
comes
saying
in.
charge a huge balance. Like put a tank of gas on there every month or something
groceries.
like that.
Yeah.
Just something to have some credit. I think it's important for everybody to have, and just a working knowledge of how the bills work, what does it cost to run our family is a big one. And I think on that topic, forced savings is one of the best tools anybody can have, making it set it and forget it. Like if you have to consciously decide how much money am I going to save every single month, you're just not going to do it. It's going to go to Amazon packages or DoorDash or just random stuff. It just kids sports.
My
Travel sports.
23-year-old came into my house one day at lunch and he said, "Okay, Mom, I just switched. I am putting this much from my paycheck each month into my savings.
That's
I'm going to
perfect.
buy stocks with this little amount.
Good job,
And the
Grady.
rest of it goes to
Yeah, that's amazing.
all my bills." He's so excited about
That's
it.
perfect. That's pay yourself first. And that is one of the best ways that you can accumulate wealth. Like that is where your next down payment on a house is going to come from. Or if you have an emergency on something, it's how you avoid credit card debt. I think that's a super important thing. So best thing you can do is have it split out of your paycheck like that. And if your employer doesn't offer that, just set up an auto transfer and bonus points if you put it at a bank outside of your normal one so that you don't see it and you can't easily just be like transfer it right back, transfer it back to checking. Get something that's high yield somewhere else that you can absolutely forget that you have that money. And I think that's important to do for both people in the marriage if they can do that.
I do
That's
like
what-
an overflow. So if one account hits like $5,000 and you know that's covering everything, the rest of it goes into
love
American
that.
Express savings. But I do have a question. If the Fed didn't lower the rate yesterday on interest rates, why did my savings account just
I know
go
I got
up?
a call from my bank today too saying things dropped 0.15. I don't know. I think it's just an excuse for them to do it, but I don't know the answer to that.
Forrest and I think it's so easy to make goals and dream, and then years and years and years have passed and you haven't done those things. And a large part of the reason is because it's expensive. It's expensive to travel and go on vacation and take trips and whatnot. So we opened exactly what you were just talking about, a completely separate high yield savings account that's in a different bank. And we decided we were each going to transfer any bonus money that we had into it. And so now we have a fun little vacation fund that we can use that is just sitting there so that when we decide, okay, let's go ahead and get this scheduled, it's not just a dream anymore. It's,
It's
something we
not
can actually
stressful
do.
either.
Exactly.
Well, and I think you just hit on something really key. The dream is the reason you'll do the savings. If you
Yes.
don't have the dream or the goal of what you're saving for, it's much harder. You're like, what's this arbitrary money going?
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to spend this on? But if you know a specific thing that you're saving for, you're a lot more incentivized to
Hawaii.
do it. Yeah. A second home, a trip, a new car.
Yeah.
Like
Home
it can be
renovation.
something
Yeah.
small. It can be like a pair of boots that
A
you saw that
dog.
you're all about, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
getting
it-
a dog.
Sure. It could be anything. So I think it's really important that everybody have those kind of goals and dreams and to talk about those together. My husband is terrible about this. I'm like, I am the biggest dreamer and I love setting huge goals and I
Me
want to do
too.
all the things in the world. And he's like, what are we going to do tomorrow? We might get to plan a vacation a couple months out, but we always kind of joke that he's like the vacation princess because he doesn't even really know where we're going or what flights we're on or where we're staying or anything
just
like
shows
that.
up,
So I'm just like, here's your ticket, here's your passport. Like,
Yep.
but you know, he knows he likes to be on a beach whenever possible, and so I have to kind of implement and make that happen. But
And if you save ahead of time, it's positive reinforcement. But if you don't save and you put everything on your credit card, that's like negative reinforcement. And
Yeah.
you're going to be stressed out how much everything cost on your vacation.
Exactly. I think bringing it back a little bit too to having joint accounts. I was doing a little bit of research because obviously this isn't something I have very much experience with, and something that I read is it can really foster more trust because you both have eyes on everything. I think you do obviously, because of that, have to communicate a lot more and be a lot more vulnerable and open with each other. But something that I do have experience with is when I switched my LLC to an S Corp, I hired a bookkeeper. And every month I have to send her my full bank statement and my full credit card statement. And on every single line item, I have to write, what the expense was for so she can help track my profit and loss statements. And that in and of itself made me the most financially responsible I've ever been.
I was going to say that's some good accountability.
Because all of a sudden somebody was questioning all of my
Totally.
payments on there. Not saying that with your partner you should question every line item of their bank statement, but I do think that if you have somebody paying attention to your spending, it can be a really good source of accountability so that you're not just clicking all the clickbait and, buying all the Amazon finds and whatever it is.
Not only that, but it costs a lot to get your nails done, to get our hair done, to buy the makeup, the clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's where some of the disconnect comes from is men and women, different things are important to them. Like my husband wouldn't ever even notice if I got my hair cut or not. They just don't care that much. And his haircut costs $40, it's a lot different. So
Yeah.
I do think that communication is always the key to that. And just having those conversations around what extra do we have or do we not have extra? Because if only one person knows that we need to be watching the budget, that's a recipe for people being pissed off and for not trusting each other around money.
Absolutely. Yeah. And making sure that you're aligned in how you want to spend your money.
Yeah.
Is it super important to us that we take a vacation every single year or that we have a really loaded retirement account or that, what are our big financial goals and what are our small financial goals? Are we going to be expecting to contribute equally? Are we expecting that whoever's making more is contributing more? I just think that making sure that up front, before you even make the decision of combined or not combined, making sure that you're having those conversations. I know that I never had those conversations in the very beginning of a relationship. It was always a couple years down the road. And by then, it's like we all have our own habits and our own spending habits. And so then maybe it was more of an uncomfortable conversation than if we would have known those things up front about each other.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Upfront is the key. And not only just on how much you spend, how much you have, but also your debts, just like you said. I have seen some really awkward conversations at mortgage applications before where one spouse had credit card debt the other one didn't know about. And that can be really uncomfortable. I've seen couples where they were so divided in their finances that they were like, one of them ended up with a huge amount of debt and the other one was like, that's your problem. And I don't think that's fair either. I mean, I think there's got to be better conversations before it gets out of hand, but I think you're in it together. And I think that's the argument for combining things is, you're vowing that you are going to be together forever. And I know that sounds old school, but that's still the premise, right? Isn't that what the goal is? So if that is the goal, then there should be some trust in that combination. And I understand preparing for the fact that you might not be together someday, but
maybe that's the basis to the whole thing is if you're having that distrust, where is that coming from?
Yeah.
And get that taken care of before you combine the finances so that
Yeah.
you built the foundation. Now you can layer.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And a lot of people, we were just babies out of college when we got together and we didn't have shit.
Yeah.
I was like, I got my $1,200 and you got your 600. Woohoo. Not a big deal, but we've built a lot together at this point, but our conversation around money has changed dramatically since it did in the very beginning. And so I think it's a moving target. Just because you start out one way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And I think you can definitely change things over time based on what feels right for your family.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of the Prosperity Playbook. We will be back next week with a topic on workplace friendships and boundary setting. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week. Here's to empowering one another, one story at a time.